for joining us on The Skeptic Psychic, where we delve into ancient societies, ghosts, the paranormal, UFOs, all looking at it from the perspective of the true believer and from the skeptic perspective. Joining me, my partner, my co-host, my sibling, Kimber Rodriguez. Myself, I am Richard Gregg. And again, let's look into being the skeptic psychic.
Good evening. How you doing today? Everybody. Everybody wants to be happy today. Hello.
Richard's better.
Yes.
He's better.
Yes.
And welcome again to the Skeptic Psychic. Of course, I am your Richard, and with me always is my wonderful, sweet, courteous, intelligent, highly successful sister of mine, Kimber Rodriguez. And who do we have with us today?
I'm Shelley Priest, and I absolutely love graveyards and cemeteries, more cemeteries. But so we're here to talk about some of the symbols and stuff, and I hope to enlighten you and give you some stories. And it's there's more to it than people think about.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, when I think of death and cemeteries, I think of History of the World Part One at the beginning, where the one of the characters died, and you have Orson Welles overhead saying, and even back then, death was considered with a sense of awe, and people are like, oh,
And then they whipped the body out the cave. They just whipped it out the cave.
So, what is the difference between a cemetery and a graveyard? I mean, I always thought that it was the same thing, just a different name for it.
No, a graveyard is always connected to a church.
Oh, okay.
And it would have been called a churchyard, a burial ground. They never would have used cemetery for that. And a cemetery is a later a later place for burial. And there are several different places that are cemeteries. There's a public cemetery, which is owned by the county or the state or the city. And you'll have military graveyards. You'll have different religious graveyards. You have Catholic graveyards, you have Jewish graveyards. You have those kind of graveyards. You've got, I've got a bad cat. You've got different lodges that will have their own cemeteries. The Oddfellows, the Masons. The Masons will have their own cemeteries. There are other kinds, and you kind of have to be aware of where you are if you're trying to find out more about a particular headstone. It's good to know what kind of cemetery you're in. It'll help you if you're in a graveyard. Mm-hmm. Most of the symbols are going to be religious.
Oh, okay.
If you're in a cemetery, you may see the same symbol, but it could mean two different things. It means something different in a cemetery, or it could mean something different in a Masonic lodge's cemetery. They may have an eye that means something totally different to the eye of God.
Right.
So you can get.
Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt. So basically, when you're talking about a cemetery, you may see a Buddhist or Hindu tombstone right next to the basic Catholic or Christian burial stones as well.
If it's a public cemetery, which would be owned and cared for by the community, anybody can get into a public cemetery. With a lot of graveyards, you have to belong to that particular church, or you have to belong to whatever lodge, or you have to be a veteran to get into other cemeteries. A public cemetery is the most common because it doesn't require you to have been any particular persuasion or anything to get into it. So that's the most common. And that's where you'll find your biggest mix of different symbols is in the cemeteries, the public cemeteries. So
Kind of reminds me of that joke. Why are cemeteries so popular?
People are dying to get in it.
Yep.
And I'm always warning people, just remember the dead always will outnumber the living.
Yes.
It's better to be friends with them than be enemies with the dead, because they will outnumber you.
Yes.
But yes, there is a difference between a graveyard and a cemetery. And with cemetery, it also depends on who owns it and runs it. So yeah, and a lot of people don't think about it or wonder about it, but there is a difference. It's just like a difference between a casket and a coffin. There are differences, even though people use the word, they interchange the word. There are differences. So
interesting. Raymond says brains.
oh geez, stop, Raymond. they pick on me a lot because they think I know too much.
Not a problem. So yeah, I know growing up, I've always had an innate fear of cemeteries or graveyards. I remember as a kid, whenever we would drive by one, I would like get down in the seat and hide.
Yeah.
Always afraid that the spirits were going to get up and chase me. And to this day, I still feel uncomfortable going to funerals or being in cemeteries or graveyards.
Right.
So
it's common. A lot of people are like that. A lot of people are
Well,
like that.
my personal view of the series, I'm always afraid of stepping on people. I will walk around, give a 6-foot berth, going around them. It's like, excuse me, pardon me, excuse me, excuse me, pardon me, excuse me.
But sometimes that's hard because the way that they're so close together, sometimes it's hard to walk through without actually stepping on a grave.
Well, that's part of the difference between older cemeteries and what happened in the 1800s with the park cemeteries, the park style cemeteries. The older cemeteries, you'll find the headstones lined right up, just like soldiers, right in a row. And right at their feet, you'll see another row. And there's really no place to wander. It was, and that was, a lot of it was because it was graveyards more than cemeteries. And more people were packed into those graveyards. And over time, they ended up even burying them, not always 6 feet. There would be someone there. There would be someone at 4 feet. There would be someone at 2 feet. And they were getting very, 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 very crowded. And a lot of times if a church or a graveyard wall would deteriorate and fall, there would be corpses that would come out of the graveyard and spill out. And that was first of all, if they were contagious, it was dangerous to the living people and it was gross. And yeah, or any of the other things that they had, the smallpox, the measles, the typhoid, all of the, and it was gross and it was smelly and vampires. If they got up and walked, at least they'd be getting out of the way and not staying there a while. But it was actually in France that they started trying to come up with an idea for this overcrowding problem. And they came up with a bigger type cemetery in a park-like setting that would have more space, wouldn't necessarily be connected to a cemetery. So you wouldn't have all of just those people just all piling up. You could space them out. And they included trees, shrubs, and plants with the idea that the roots of those plants would help keep the bodies in place.
Interesting.
So they created a big park like cemetery. And my French isn't good. I know the name of it in one of these books. But other countries began looking at this, and the cemetery became not only a cemetery, but a place where people were very interested in visiting, and it became a tourist attraction. So other countries with the same problems began looking at this park-like setting. And so they began, and it was actually in Massachusetts that started our first park-like cemetery, and they actually hired architects and builders to design it and to plan it and to build it, and it was a huge success, and it just began a park-like setting. So you can tell a bit of the age of a cemetery even from the road by looking at how it's set up. If it's row after row after row without plants of just people, 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 it's an older cemetery, a pioneer cemetery or something like that. If you've got your park-like settings and you've got, plenty of plants and plenty of trees, you've got an older cemetery after the 1860s or around the 1860s on, because that's how they had to change it. And it was for some disgusting reasons, but it worked out.
Right. Yeah, I know our grandparents are buried in a military cemetery, and they're so overcrowded that now everyone has to be cremated to be buried there.
Yep. So. They're doing that in a lot of public cemeteries too. And you have to have flat headstones so that they can just mow right straight over. They don't allow, where my son is buried, he's got a flat headstone. And now, like where my mom and my grandparents are, you have to be cremated to do it. So, times they are changing.
This is true.
Well, do you know anything about cisterns?
I know anything about a cistern?
Cisterns, where they have basically where they've taken the graves and dug them up and put all the bones in, the skulls on one side, the rib cages, just kind of built a whole.
Rather like the Paris Underground and
right.
all of that. Okay.
Yeah, like the catacombs.
Yes.
Yes. So kind of like almost like a shrine of bones, I guess you could say.
Yep. But that shows you how much of a problem they had with all of these bodies when you see how many were there, and they still were crowded. So they really needed to work on doing something about it. And it's odd, you wouldn't think a park-like setting would have helped, but it seems to have done the thing. So I don't know. But yes, I have, the catacombs are crazy great. I would love to get there sometime to see them.
Yes. I know there's
saying cistern, and I was going to say, I guess I've heard of some bodies being in a cistern, but that's usually frowned upon.
I mean, there are. I know there's several in France as well as Spain and Italy where they just basically built a whole chapel around using people's bones in order to teach people that what the other world was like.
Yes.
You moved the headstones, but you didn't move the bodies. Yes, there's actually
that's true.
There's a neighborhood in Houston, Texas that they did this with. And they've had a lot of weird things happen in the homes, and they found out that it was I think Poltergeist was partly based on it, and then they also did a TV movie called Grave Secrets that was based on it.
Yeah.
So it's sad that really happens.
And the people that lived there lost so much money because their houses just weren't anything once it got out that that had happened. So there are stories. There are stories.
Yes. There's actually also I think it's in Mexico or somewhere in South America where they have it's like an underground cavern, but it's full of mummies. I don't know if you've heard about that one where everybody's like just set up there and you can go through almost like a museum and see the bodies laying out.
They're still dressed in their clothes. I've heard of that. Is that the one with the monks?
No, this is another one because there's the one with the monks. Yeah, there's the one with the monks, and then this one
Yeah.
I think the one with the monks is in Europe, but this one's in Mexico, and they have
Okay.
like all these people
Okay.
who've passed. So
Yeah. And you could just go and look at them and they're all still right there. And
mhm.
I don't know.
Laid out in their Sunday best, and
Yeah. Yeah. So,
yes,
but yes. So getting on with cemeteries.
yes.
Yes.
Okay. I was going to say, Kimber, what else do you have? Let's see. Oh, some of the things that I think about, the character of Pip always comes to mind. Yeah. When I first go into a cemetery, because Pip was an orphan. What?
Right. Didn't he also meet the thief there in the graveyard, who
Mhm.
basically
The one that
inherited everything from him?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. But
yes,
he never saw his parents. He didn't even see any pictures of him. And he talks about becoming, his picture of his parents was the headstone and the shapes of the letters on the headstone. And I kind of always think about that as it's very real in how we see it. All we know about these people is the shapes of the letters and the letters on their headstone, so in a very real way, Pip was just making an observation that we all have made. So
yes, yes. Great Expectations has always been my favorite Dickens story. So
yes.
always,
Yeah. Yep. And Pip, he always comes to mind when I enter into a cemetery and start to look at the headstones. So yeah.
yes. Excuse me a
So
moment. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Still got a little bit of a cough going on.
your voice still sounds a little gravelly. I
Yes,
mean, maybe
that's
it always does, but from what I didn't know of you, it sounds gravelly.
no, just since I've been sick. Yeah, my friends are like, you sounded better when you were actually full blown flu than you sound like now. And I'm like,
Right.
gee, thanks.
I always sound like Morticia, but I always look like Fester when I'm sick.
Well,
Oh,
to me, it's basically, I always thought I'd look like Gomez, but turns out I might be just Pugsley.
Pugsley
yes.
had a good work ethic.
Yeah.
Work
Mhm.
ethic.
Well, with the
Yeah.
sister that wants to kill him all the time, come on. He's got to.
I
Yes.
understand that feeling. I needed to kill my brother.
Right.
So because I know, what are the laws pertain as far as like if somebody dies, do they have to be buried in a cemetery or can they be buried on your own property or like how does
They
that work these days?
you can have a family plot and you can have family members buried. You have to get your permits and the variances and all of that to get it done, but it is still possible to do today. And it is becoming, because cremation is on the rise, it is becoming more common for just non-burials. People just have their ashes put somewhere, even scattered on the ground and like that. So we've got a lot of different alternatives. We're also finding that there are more and more environmentally friendly burials, and they make sure that they're not in an urn that won't decompose. They decompose and then they become part of a plant, which is my personal favorite. That's
Right.
kind of what I've let the family know, and then when I'm a tree, come over and I'll drop a limb on you or something. Yeah.
Right. I've thought of the same thing, but the reason I'm asking is I remember growing up in the 80s and right behind my friend's house was a field, and at the edge of the field, like where her fence would be, there was a
Yeah.
tombstone of a child. And I always thought that was so odd that, there was just that
Yeah.
one person buried there and right
Yeah.
almost in her backyard. And So I was like, can
Yeah.
I even
Oh,
do that?
yeah, you can. You have to get nowadays. You have to get permission. Now, I'm sure back, when there were farms and things like that, towns and cities didn't get into the people's businesses as much, and you could do something like that. People back then died at home more. You very rarely hear of somebody dying at home now, but
Right.
it was a family dealing. They dealt with the person dying, they dealt with them when they died, and they dealt with the body afterwards. It wasn't like it is today, where we're not around the dead. We don't deal with, once they're dead, what do we do? It's all taken care of for us. Back then it was not that way. So
Interesting. And then about the cremation and the scattering, I had heard that it was illegal to scatter ashes in the wind. Is that correct?
it's even though the ashes don't contain anything contagious, they say that it's not good for the air. It's not, and it's for places like Disney World, Disneyland, where there's a lot of people going. Honestly, I wouldn't want to be knee deep in Uncle Ned's ashes when I'm
Right.
trying to get on a ride, So, in a very public place, yeah, and those are also privately owned.
Right.
Really, they're corporations. So, that wouldn't be fair. I wouldn't want someone to come and dump something on my lawn.
Right.
So, but I know that you can take ashes out into, like we have the national parks, and a lot of people choose to do that. And I kind of like that idea, especially if they have the idea of planting a tree with that person.
Our mother would
Um,
love for us to give her a Viking funeral.
No,
Put her on a boat right out there to the middle of the water and shoot the flaming arrows out there for her.
no, that's not what she wants.
That's what she told me.
She told me that she's always wanted to travel the world and never had a chance to, so she wants her ashes scattered in the wind so that she can
um,
travel, was what
Yeah,
she
she
told
she
me.
told me she wanted a Viking funeral. Just put her out to sea and just set the arrows aflame and send them out to her. We're all going to be wearing the weird horned hats and long beards and
Have the mead.
have the maid, our axes
oh
at his
my
hand,
God.
and
To have a son like you, I understand her reasoning. I think I get it, Richard.
she actually would love to. Her funeral would.
Hi,
She wants
Autumn.
to have balloons and clowns and kind of a carnival setting, so that way
The
nobody is sad.
celebration.
Right.
A celebration of life. Yep. Yep.
Right.
Um
Yeah.
that it used to be families were responsible for the upkeep of their own family plots, even in public cemeteries. And it used to be that it was like a celebration, in that families would all get together. They called it Decoration Day. Families would all get together. They'd pack picnics, and they would go and they would clean their area, but everybody was cleaning their family areas, and it was a social gathering. And I know I've read about carriage races that they've had during this Decoration Day. The kids had games that they would play. I actually had heard of certain festivals being held at the same time, and it was kind of a get together to honor the social community, as well as honoring the dead and keeping them in the remembrances. There were often prayer meetings there also. And for me, that really ties in with Day of the Dead, the Mexican
The Dias de
way
los
that they
Muertos.
celebrate.
Yes.
Hmm?
The Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the
Yes,
Dead.
yes, yes. I absolutely love, love, love the way that they handle that, and the way that they teach their children, and the way that they have the continuity of the elders with today's people, with tomorrow's people. It it's all together, and it's a celebration. There is not the fear, there's not the loathing of a dead person.
Mhm.
It's joyous.
Well, up until my father-in-law moved, he would actually go out to the cemetery and clean up his departed wives, as well as my brother-in-law's gravesite. Made sure they had grass, that sort of thing, mow it, that water, as
Mhm.
all that jazz. And he moved
Yeah.
away, and so we need to actually go up there and check up.
Right. Check up on it. And
Check
that's
up
how
on
it used to be. It was during World War II that people started moving. They became very mobile during World War II. And it became impossible for families to return to their hometowns, to start taking care of the cemeteries. And that's when they started offering, and now it's mandatory, the perpetual care. And it's included in the burial price. And that came about in World War II, when everybody was very mobile, and it just wasn't feasible for families to come back and clean. So it's a fairly new thing. So I can see why a family member would still go back and look at them. So
Yeah. I know. I think it's in Peru. They have a tradition where once a year they dig up their dead and dress them in clothing and take them out and spend the day with them. And
yeah, yeah,
so
yeah. And in Louisiana, you get what, a year and a day, and then they could put another body in with you. I think because of the way that they are buried there, decomposition is so much faster. But it has to be because of the water levels,
right.
there. And so yeah, a lot of people get opened up and looked at.
Yes.
So,
That's a very interesting place because they're actually, since they're below sea level, they can't bury their dead under the
right,
ground or
right.
they'll
So
float
they have
back up.
the above ground.
Yes.
I think that I don't think I would enjoy that type of cemetery as much as the ones we have around here.
I've actually
So
heard they're pretty interesting. I have a friend, well, my best friend who passed away, she had been to New Orleans and visited the very famous cemetery there. And she said it was actually pretty interesting to see the way that it was set up and the way the
ah,
kind of,
did she visit who was that? Madame LaRue, or who is
oh,
Marie Laveau.
there
Marie
you go.
Laveau. Thank
Yes.
you.
Yes.
I agree with
Oh,
Autumn. I wonder if it
that
smells.
smells. Which one? I mean, after a year and they're just underground, decomposition may not even have started
Mhm.
in some cases, which is a whole nother show, because that would go into the whole vampire thing.
Mhm.
If
Right.
they weren't
Yeah.
decomposing, that was a whole different issue for people.
Yeah.
Um,
I know they say now because of the fact of the embalming and we use so many preservatives on our skin and stuff that there have been bodies that they've dug up like 5 years down the
yeah,
road and they're
yeah,
still not fully
yeah.
decomposed.
So yes, a year and a day in the tomb in Louisiana that I know of. So plus they put, you're in a lead lined coffin, you've got the cement all around you. There's no way for the worms to get in. You're going to sit there in your own juices. And I'm just like,
Oh,
no. After 3 days, I can't stand the way I smell. How is this going to work?
Right.
right.
You know, when you think about it, it's so the people that dig up the dead, I'm sure they don't have those kind of barriers to
Mhm.
have to get through. So you're going to see more decomposition in those
Right.
bodies, just because there is more connection to the earth, and more connection to the changes in weather. And so decomposition can take a more natural course.
Right. Yeah, it reminds me of when they had Hurricane Katrina and the flooding actually brought up a lot of those
Lost a lot of,
caskets. Oh
yeah,
my goodness.
yeah, yeah. That
I
that was pretty heartbreaking.
yes.
Pretty, yeah.
Right. Yes.
So, um, Another thing that I wanted to say about the garden type cemeteries, 1861, I really want to touch on this because that is a very, very important year for cemeteries.
Okay.
Because in America, and this is both sides of the Atlantic, America, we had the Civil War going. And by the end of the Civil War, there was 620,000 soldiers dead. That's not civilians, that's the soldiers.
Right.
So it was very rare to find a person that didn't have a family member or a friend or somebody that they knew that had died. So death was very prevalent, and we were a nation in mourning. And in 1861, people really were beginning to realize this is not going to be a fast war. We're going to have to be in this for a little while, longer than we thought. At the same time, across in England, Albert, Queen Victoria's husband, died in December of 1861. And she fell into mourning, deep, deep, deep mourning. And the British subjects all followed suit. They tended to follow the royal family. If they did something, the whole group would follow them. And because she had some issues mentally, she enjoyed the mourning. I'm going to say it. This is my opinion, but I believe she really got into the whole mourning thing. She lived it. It became who she was. And so mourning became very popular over there. There were towns where you could not find black material. It was sold up as soon as it was brought into a store. People were snapping up all of the black material. Mourning jewelry became a thing. Any kind of memento from a dead person became a thing. Artwork, literature, all of it romanticized and talked about mourning and death and grieving. And so we had on both sides of the Atlantic people grieving terribly, and they had these parks that now people could wander through and walk through and look at, and headstones started changing. They became less strict and less grim in saying, remember you must die, which was a popular epitaph on a great many of the pre-Civil War and back headstones. Or it started, here are the remains of, here lies in peace, here is the dearly departed, gone but not forgotten. These kind of things were taking the place of the more grim behave or you go to hell kind of sayings. And they also started replacing skull and crossbones on these, and the faces became at first just a generic angel with wings type face. And then later on, as you got through the Civil War, then they became children faces with wings. So they softened the things on the headstones, and they became more and more for people friendly, instead of either you were a very pious person and we're going to put that on there and show how pious you were and how great you were, or we're going to remind people that are looking at this, you're soon to be here, and have you leave feeling kind of, this is a great thing. And 1861 really was the year when you see a change in the headstones, a change in the shape of the headstones, and you also started seeing manufactured headstones. Granite was the popular headstone after that. Whereas before that, a lot of times it was just anything that was around, limestone and things like that. And after weathering, you couldn't read what was on them very well. But the markers became more permanent. They became softer looking. They changed shape. You wouldn't see the rounded ones so much anymore, because that, again, was meant as a religious thing. That was to look like the 10 Commandments that Moses tablets that he had. Then you started seeing more of the flat types, or you would see the big pillar types.
Mhm.
And there were more epitaphs. Before they didn't have, because the gravestones weren't manufactured, they were oftentimes made by someone local. And the lettering could be hard to do, and the space was limited, and often the stone wasn't the greatest to put something on it. After 1861, then you get your kind of poems that could be put there. The Empty Chair is a poem, was very, very popular, and everybody had to have the empty chair put on their headstones. So as you're looking at the different headstones, you can kind of almost tell the dates also by the way the headstones look. If you're not sure if you're in an old cemetery from way back or a newer one, sometimes just the shapes of the headstones will tell you, as well as the symbols and the pictures will tell you kind of what you're looking at. The newer ones are a softer look, friendlier. The older ones, they'll just tell you where it is and what it is, and you better not do it.
Right. Yes, Autumn's asking about if some of them were made out of wood as well.
Yes. But unfortunately, they didn't last. The earliest would be a stack of stones, just a pile of stones to mark where someone was buried. And then, of course, they began the wooden stones, and they also just used, like I said, the local stones. It was up to what the family could afford, what the situation was that the person died in, because a lot of the wooden crosses were for men that were at war, in battle. And a lot of times they would be buried alongside of a road. And so a lot of times you would see on these wooden crosses, it would say pause. And that was to get you to pause because there were burials right there. But yeah, they had but they didn't last, of course. So
right. Yes.
Yeah, to keep wildlife from digging them up. Yeah, that's yeah. Mom, don't ignore my question.
Yes.
Is it past your bedtime, daughter, Autumn?
Yes. Wasn't our grandfather's favorite hymn "The Old Rugged Cross"?
That was Papa Jim's. Papa Greg's was
I think I remembered him telling me it was the Old Rugged Cross.
I remember him telling me it was Andy.
No, that was just a joke he told about Andy.
We got you confused, don't we?
Is a poem or is a
It's
song?
a song.
It's a song. Basically, he tells a joke about how, because there's this hymn about talking about how he walks with you and he talks with you, and so he was like,
to the river. Yes. I come to the river. And he walks with me and he talks with me. He tells me I am his own. See, that's what it is.
So my grandfather jokes that growing up, he always wondered who Andy was.
I actually really like that. I like that. And that song we sang at my Gram's get together and my grandpa's too. So I guess we should wonder who Andy was.
Right.
So it's actually what the name of God is, because Andy walks with me and he talks with me. So that's I'm his own.
Oh my goodness. You never quite know where this conversation is going to go, do you?
Right.
Every week.
Yes, I blame it on ADD. Always going off on tangents with the ADD.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say a Facebook user. I come to the garden alone. Yep. Autumn, yes, it's past my bedtime, but her dog had to go out. And then I saw the fudge she made. She made a ton of fudge.
Oh,
and Anubis. Yeah, Anubis is the face of the jackal. He dug up graves, so he wore a mask to protect the graves.
Right.
Yes.
So, okay. Now they can put the person's favorite expression. Yes. Now, and especially because they have the laser engraving, you could put any picture, you could put colored pictures in, you can put anything in, and oh, and I've heard there a lot of people actually are putting cell phones in with the dead, and
Really?
and I actually was just reading about headstones now. They're saying they're starting to read like LinkedIn, and I'm not
Really?
100% sure what LinkedIn is, but I'm
It's
guessing it's something technical.
It's
it's
a social
basically
media for business people. So
Oh,
it's kind
okay.
of like Facebook, but it's more like business oriented. So they have like their resumes on there, and
Okay. Well,
so
they're saying that headstones now are starting to look more like that. So I guess
okay.
that's kind of where it's going to. People are putting that in. So
Oh, yes, here lies Bob. Bob worked for 12 years as a secretary. He has
yeah,
a degree.
yeah.
there was a grave site that at my where my brother-in-law's buried, where it's basically somebody installed Big Willie Styles Will Smith's CD in the into the headstone.
So you could play, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I've heard of headstones where they play messages from the dead. The people. They actually
Right.
record themselves, and then you can play it in the headstones, and
And
it sounds weird, but
this other
you know,
graves cemetery I went to, because it's not a grave site, is basically I've seen it in Ripley's, and I've actually seen it face to face. It's the tombstone reads, "Deep in is it deep enough?"
is it deep enough?
Hmm.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah. Sorry, I
here's
had a
one of
thought in my brain. Oh, okay. Speaking of the messages from the dead, I was reading something yesterday that Alexa for Amazon is coming out with this new feature where the voice can be in the voice of a loved one that's passed.
mhm.
I'm like, that's a little too creepy for
Yeah,
me.
yeah, yeah. A Stephen King story where they put the cell phone of the guy who passed in the coffin, and then he could talk to him. Yeah, I think that's the idea of them putting the cell phones in so that they can communicate with him. But I've
Yeah.
never owned a cell phone, so I'll
Yeah.
just talk to the worms.
My after my dad passed, my stepmom had to get rid of her cell phone because every night around the time that he passed, the phone would ring and it would say my dad's number, and she'd answer and it would be nothing but static. And it freaked her out so bad that she was like, I'm not having this anymore. So she disconnected her cell phone.
I've heard stories of that one train crash, I think it was, and the whole family, there were like 47 calls from this guy's number, and he was one of the ones killed instantly in the train crash. He couldn't have called any of them.
I
But
think I remember
there
hearing
were
of
like
that.
47, and it was to different family members.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
like,
I think I remember hearing about that too with the Twin Towers, somebody on the plane as
yes,
well.
yes.
And
Yeah.
it was interesting because on the
Good
plane,
night,
you have to
Autumn.
turn your phone off because or put it in airplane mode. But yet this they were getting calls
Getting
from this
calls.
guy
Yeah.
after the plane had crashed.
I
So
don't think the supernatural follows all the rules.
no. No, I think they're beyond having to follow the rules at that point.
Right.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
So,
So
okay. Are we going to
So
get back,
yes, back on topic.
back on
back
topic.
on
Sorry.
topic a little bit? I wrote up a ton of stuff for
Yes.
Kimbra, so I was going to say we got to use some of it.
Yes, definitely. So, should we go into the different symbolisms on
Yeah,
the?
yeah,
Because I know
that'll
you
work.
see a lot of great symbolism.
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna say I've got it all written up here for you with some of the most common ones, which for me would have to start off with a dove. You see a dove everywhere, and of course it means innocence and purity, and it's often used, for children. But I think the dove is the most common of them all. Um, if you see a plant on a headstone, it's important to look at what the plant is. If it's a bud, if it has a broken stem, if it's broken in half, if it isn't fully grown, that'll tell you there's a child there, someone whose life was definitely cut short. If it's in full bloom, especially a rose, it's somebody who died probably in their 20s, which would have been considered right at the height of their life, and they passed away. So you have to kind of look at that. Trying to think some other big ones. Hands are interesting on headstones because you really have to look at the clothes they're wearing. That's the first thing you have to look at when you look at hands. If they're, I'm going to try to do a handshake, but it's going to be backwards but you have to look at what they've got on. And if one is definitely a male and one looks like a female, it's usually a married couple. If it's both male, they're probably brothers of the same fraternities. Or if you're in a graveyard, it's most likely going to be God taking the hand of the deceased up to heaven. And that's also if you see a hand pointing down, it doesn't mean that's where they're going.
Right.
It's God coming down and taking the deceased. And because it's pointing down, it could also mean an accident. This deceased suffered an accident because it's an abrupt, almost like a lightning thing. It's abrupt, it's coming down and it's, picking you out. So it probably was an accident or something very fast for the death if they're pointing down. And of course, if they're pointing up, it's a pious thing. They were a good person and they're headed to heaven, and everybody knows. If they've got one finger pointed out in the handshake, they're Masonic. And if the wife was also Masonic and they do the handshake, they each do it like this. And if they do it correctly, like I can't, it will look like the symbol in the Masonic symbol. And so it depends on what the hands are doing and what they look like, to tell you more of who they are and what they are. For animals, lambs are probably the biggest animal that you'll see on a lot of graves, and that's mostly for children. It's the innocence, of course. Again, it also has a great symbolic meaning with Jesus because he was called the Lamb of God, and he was also a shepherd. He was considered, herding the flock and the shepherd. So a lamb was quite oftentimes depicted on a lot of different headstones. So those are some of the more common. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones.
Excuse me.
Got me at a disadvantage after I typed it all up. I guess I let it all go. What did I say?
So we got the flora, which you went through, the flowers.
Yeah, some of the different flowers. There are so many flowers. In the Victorian era, flowers had a language all of their own. And that went with romance. It went with families. It went anything. You could have a flower or a plant for just about anything you were doing, anything you were experiencing. And that went into graveyards. And so really, you wouldn't have time to go through every single type of flower that you might see. The acanthus flower is probably the most prevalent, and that goes all the way back to the Corinthian columns. You'll see acanthus flowers or plants up on the columns. So that was a very common feature in columns, in walls. So it was a carryover onto headstones. So you'll see a lot of acanthus flowers, and they're pretty. They're pretty to look at. Lily of the Valley, that is, you'll see that more in religious graveyards, because that's the Virgin Mary is associated with the lily of the valley. Her tears supposedly fell, and the first lily of the valley grew from her tears. Trying to think of some other plants that you might see a lot. Roses, of course, that's,
Right.
and again, you have to look at the type of rose to try to figure out, it'll help you figure out the age of the person. I'm trying to think what else.
Tulips.
Tulips, you see them, and they're not as prevalent as you would think they would be. You do see them, but not very often, and you never see a sunflower. In all the books that I have read, I've never had a person they've talked about not ever seeing one, but not that they've ever been able to find a sunflower.
I'm wondering if because sunflowers are more like, about happiness and life and joy, and you don't really think of happiness and joy when someone passes, sadly.
Right.
So.
But I'm surprised the Victorians didn't come up with something,
right?
Because they really got into their different ideas of what these flowers and plants all meant. So, but I'm trying to see. Let me see what else I have here, because I had a whole bunch of stuff written. What should we talk about, guys?
Well, I do have some questions, if you don't mind.
I'll try to come up with an answer if I can.
Okay. What is the point of basically nudity when it comes on statues and that sort of thing? And,
nudity had a couple of different ideas behind it, because you're born nude. It could be innocence and purity, because you're not allowed to take any worldly goods with you to the afterlife. It could be a show of your willingness to go to the afterlife, your willingness to put aside all of your worldly goods to be in heaven. And then the other way that they thought of it, of course, was, lust and things like that. And you won't see that. That's my husband walking around there without his shirt on. Who just turned on it could be the candles making it crazy in here. But the nudity that you'll see in cemeteries oftentimes is going to be the worldly goods that you're leaving behind, or the innocence of a newborn baby. So I got bot. Oh yeah, I still see that bot. Yeah, there's a bot.
Well, I know that in the Jewish faith, I know that they believe we go out of this world the way we come in. So I know that they bury the dead nude in a plain white wooden box, no symbols or anything like that. So that makes
they
sense.
also put a coin on top of the
right.
If it's if it's a penny, you know of the person. If it's a nickel, you're I think it goes all the way up to a dollar coin, where you've actually are part of the family. You're the person's best friend. Everybody, although Jack Benny, everybody puts a penny on his gravestone because of his his rumored stinginess.
Yeah.
Well, I've also seen where they put rocks on their tombstones. And I've always wondered what that symbolizes, or why they put a rock on there.
A rock oftentimes is a religious symbol, and it refers to Rachel's grave from the Bible, because her husband wanted to build a pillar at her burial site. And so the rocks represent that of the Bible, building a pillar at the burial site. I'm thinking to heaven, but I could be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it deals with Rachel.
Rachel's grave, as well as building of the Solomon's Temple, rebuilding it.
Oh, okay.
So it refers, yeah, it would be a temple, a symbol of building. A rock would be a symbol of building. The coins, I've heard that with military too, that the coins mean something. If you know the person, you served with them in the regiment or whatever, it's a different coin, a quarter or something. If you're, paying your respects, it's a different coin. With the coins. Now, interestingly enough, those are not considered grave decorations. Those are called grave goods. And things that pertain to that person's life or specifically deal with that person would be considered grave goods on the grave. And Jewish people don't care to put grave goods on their graves except for the coins. And it's kind of a way that you could tell if it's a Jewish headstone also, because you won't find any grave goods. There's no symbols, there's no crosses, there's no bunny rabbit statues, they don't do any of that you might find on other graves. They don't care to do that. So I think that's kind of interesting.
Yes, I know they're very, like I said, very, very much about going into this world the way going out of this world the way we came in,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, you can't take it with you.
right.
Can't take it with you. So,
So
but I'm not going quietly either.
neither am I.
Was the old cartoon? If I can't take it with me, then I ain't going.
Mhm.
There it is. There it is. But you can't. So no. But a lot of people don't think about the different things that you can see and different ways of finding out information about these people. And if you go back, if you can't even always tell by the name in a family plot who the age of the children, because back in that time, I'm talking back in the 1860s and like that, families were bigger, and the firstborn son was not named after its father. The firstborn, in fact, I think it's in this book. It has a whole listing of, they had a regular system. The firstborn son would have been named after his paternal grandfather. And then the second born son would have been named after the maternal grandfather. And then the third son would have been named after the father. So a lot of times, the firstborn is the father's father. Second is the mother's father. Third is the father, which would be the junior. The fourth son would be the father's oldest brother. And the fifth son would be the mother's oldest brother.
Right. So basically, I would like to interject, if you don't mind. In our family, my uncle is named after my my
Our grandfather,
my
our great
great
grandfather.
grandfather, and my father is the only one different. On the other side of it, my brother is named slightly after my dad. I'm named slightly after my great grandfather, who is also named after and also named after my mother.
Yeah, it stayed within the family, and they followed. My father was named after his uncle.
Yeah.
So I had a great uncle Parker, and then my father Parker. So
yeah. Well, we had our great grandfather was named Cecil. Then his son was named Cecil, and then his son was named Cecil, and then my uncle, which was my grandmother's son, my great grandfather's daughter, firstborn, was named Cecil. My dad and my oldest brother were both named Jim. On my mom's side, my grandfather's name was Richard. My mother's name was Dixie, which is the female version of Richard, and then he was named Richard.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah. So
You guys are rule breakers. That's what y'all
Yes.
are.
right.
We're the rebels.
Yes,
We
we've
do
always
Taco Mondays.
yes. And then I was named after my dad's first cousin. So
That's cool.
all of our names kind of kept in the family.
Yeah, Raymond. Raymond was the third. Yeah. Yeah, Raymond was the third. His dad was Raymond Jr. and then his grandpa was Raymond Sr. So, but back in the day they followed, and when you take these field books with you, you can actually turn to a lot of these and it'll help you figure out on the older stones. Okay, where does this person come in the children? And because it tells you for the girls too. They even had the first daughter would have been the mother's mother, second daughter, the father's mother, third daughter, the mother, fourth daughter, the mother's oldest sister, fifth daughter, the father's oldest sister. So they had a regular pecking order that this name is already predetermined and this is who they're going to be. So if you see one that has the same name as the father, that's actually the third son. That's not going to be, the very first son. That's actually the third son. And that's in a lot of the older cemeteries. But it's kind of something interesting that
is interesting, yeah.
you have to think about when you're trying to figure out the family and where they're all, where they are in the family tree.
So they didn't waste time coming up with baby names. It was everybody had a predetermined name based on their birth.
Yeah, unless they were rule breakers like you.
Yes.
So.
So,
yeah, because I made sure to name Autumn, not after anybody in the family. So, we and that's kind of how it is now. People are not naming after family members so much. They'll reach back sometimes and they'll use a middle name, as a family name. Something like we have Reeve is a family name on my mom's side, the Darling side. And my sister's oldest son, his middle name is Reeve.
Oh, okay.
So sometimes they'll, people will reach back now, but you don't have the strict rules like they had then for naming of their children, so.
Yes. I was just looking through like some of the other symbols, such as the book and the candle.
Yeah.
And the chains.
Yeah. The chains are interesting because they could be, if the link is broken, it means that the family member was probably a matriarch or a patriarch of the family, and it breaks the family apart. If there's 3 links in the chain, especially if they have letters in the middle, that's a fraternity. With the links, it's a brotherhood of some sort. If it's just 3 links and you're in a graveyard or around religious, things, it could also mean the Trinity, the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost. So that it does have the chains do have several different meanings depending on where you are. Again, you have to look around where you are to understand some of them. So, and the hearts, there's a lot of different meanings for hearts. And if you go into a Catholic cemetery, there's even more. There's all kinds of different hearts. There's flaming hearts, ivy colored hearts. The bleeding heart is suffering, torment. Flaming heart is religious zeal. A heart in the hand, it's a pair of hands. It's love and piety. Heart covered with ivy, that's friendship, faithfulness.
What if it's a lonely heart? Is that part of the club band?
Oh my goodness.
Sorry.
You have a lonely heart.
Yeah.
Well, it's Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. I mean,
okay.
Oh my gosh. But there's a lot of different symbols that you can come across. Everything. Snakes, ships, spider webs, which I thought was really cool. You could find spider webs and it symbolizes human frailty. I'm like, okay, I get it.
Okay.
And now seashells, they're kind of cool because they have been found as grave decorations as far back as prehistoric graves. So people have been putting seashells onto graves right back. It predates the Egyptian burials. So that's probably the longest and most continued of everything, is putting seashells either as a decoration or as grave goods on
And what does the seashell represent? Is it just something pretty or?
It depends on kind of where you are. If you're like me on the East Coast, it probably has something. It's a mariner's kind of thing, and it probably has something to do with the ocean. But it also has a purity connection, and it also, believe it or not, it also has longevity. So so, and that's another thing. If you see a sheath of wheat and it's in a bundle, you'll see that it means a long life lived to its fullest. And you'll see that on headstones of people that are usually about 70 years old or older. That was reserved for them. If you see just a stalk or two of wheat, it could be a Ukrainian that's buried there, because that's one of their symbols for a Ukrainian. But if you see that sheath of wheat, you're looking at somebody that has lived
Yes, for a long time.
Yes.
Yeah, they've lived, which is kind of nice to see when you see so many children in the cemeteries, and you see the same year popping up, around here, 1917. We had a horrible influenza that went around, and it was very deadly. And you see a lot of 1917s on a lot of our headstones around here, and it's sad.
Was that the Spanish influenza or?
Yep. Yeah. And you'll see, I know I've shared a few, the pictures of the people wearing the masks back then, and taking the precautions that we're finding we were taking today, nowadays.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah.
I've thought the same thing when the whole thing with the COVID came out and people were like, with the masks and everything. It reminded me back of the Spanish influenza and everybody with their masks. And
yeah. And that was horrible, because people, when they were coughing, they would just spew blood. And I read a thing about New York City and the amount of blood on the sidewalks.
Oh my God.
And it's like, you don't think about these kind of things. And then when you hear about it, you're like, how did we thought we had it bad for COVID. And then you read about this and you look at what other people went through and got stronger from.
Exactly.
Living through things like this. So, learning about the past and finding out is wonderful. And, the community of a graveyard or a cemetery, their stories are fascinating. They really are. They'll tell you a lot. And once you learn how to read those symbols, and once you understand where you are and what you're looking at, those stories you could just build on and learn so very much. And it's enjoyable. It really is.
Yes.
So, and before we leave,
Yes.
I have several cemetery books, but my two favorite, and a lot of the information that I passed on to Kimberly came from these Kimbra. She signed her name Kim.
Yes, I usually go by Kim, but yes.
And I'm like, Kim, where did she get that from? It's Kimbra, dang it, it's Kimbra. Yes. But this book, I would recommend to anybody that wants to go looking at cemeteries. Carry it with you. Let me get it right where you can see it. Stories in Stone. And I love his name. It's Douglas Keister.
Okay.
I love his name. I got this on Amazon, and it's full of pictures. It has a wonderful glossary in the back. So if you see something, you can try to look it up and see if he can tell you. He's got lots of very clear pictures, if I can get it there, so you can see all the different kinds of and stories that go along with it, so you'll understand. It's a wonderful field copy if you want to go and look at headstones and cemeteries and like that. I really highly recommend this one. It doesn't have the stories. This is very much a field guide. This will tell you what you're seeing, but it won't tell you all the little stories and the ditties that
Right.
are so delicious in learning about cemeteries and graveyards. This book is a beautiful go-to for the cemetery stories. And I was going to say, look at all of my all of my go-to little tabs to read about things. This is also good to take in the field with you because it does have symbols, and this has the A to Z of the plants. And I'm telling you, I'm not lying. A to Z plants.
Wow.
There are tons of them. Look at letter G, letter H. They just start and they go and they go and they go and they go. And this one is really good, but this also has the history of cemeteries, the history of graveyards. And it also will explain to you why you see the differences in the headstones from the past versus the headstones of today. Why the shape of a graveyard and a cemetery is different. Why they had to make the change. All of these kind of things that you don't think are going to be interesting or you don't think you're going to want to read about. If you get into it, you're really going to find there's a lot to think about and a lot to learn. And it's really fascinating and a great way to spend a sunny afternoon in a cemetery. So
Raymond says that the sequel to the book was written by his cousin Joseph Butt.
Joseph Butt. Part 2.
By the same publishing, they also published 6 Miles to the Outhouse by Willie Naked, illustrated by Betty Wong.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I know you also recommended a YouTube channel, Faces of the Forgotten.
Faces of the Forgotten. And he's a veteran. And he travels and he goes to cemeteries and he has people he does not want to do. He won't do any of the high profile headstones. He has people give him ideas for these little headstone stories. And he goes and he is wonderful at getting pictures of the people. And he loves looking at, he finds a lot of pictures on the headstones because that was popular. They would put little pictures and they've survived. Like some of them are way more than 100 years old and they look so crisp and clear. And he'll show you the pictures. And if he digs up a story, he'll put it on the side and you get to read the story of these people. And he makes these connections and he goes through all these, and the way he walks, you feel like you are at that cemetery walking with him. And
there's also a website called findagravestone.com in which somebody will go out as a volunteer and take a picture of any gravestone you're looking for. And they won't they won't do celebrity graves or anything like that. It's kind of a family type situation.
Yeah, Autumn actually did that. We started looking at a graveyard down on 245 down here, and there was one headstone that said John Rose. And she just was so pulled to that. And she actually did research and ended up going on and trying to find more information. She did find some information about him. He actually died pretty young, but I don't remember all the things of his, of his death or life even. But yeah, there's a lot. If you're willing to start looking out at places, you can find a lot of information of people that are buried just about anywhere.
Yes.
And it's so interesting. Their stories are so much better than what you'll find at the theater half the time.
Right.
But yeah, it's a lot and it's interesting. And thank you for letting me share it with you.
Oh, definitely. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been fun and educational.
And fun.
So thank you for everything, and have a great evening, everybody.
Yeah, you too.
Bye-bye from upstate New York.
Okay, Kim. Before we go, where can we find us?
Well, you can find us on YouTube or Facebook Live, Twitch, and Twitter. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe and hit the notifications so you know when we go live. If you want to listen to a replay, you can find us wherever podcasts are found.
Yep.
Apple Podcast, Spotify. And if you listen on Apple or Spotify, we ask that you rate us. And how many stars do we like?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 1.
Yes,
We want
we
5
do like
stars.
yes,
Five golden rings.
Yeah, 4 calling birds, 3 French hens.
I knew I'd get him going. I knew it.
yes, and we we'll take whatever you give us, but we do ask if you rate us, give a review also, and we'll read
Yeah.
reviews on air. If you have anything you'd like to discuss or anything you'd want to share, or if you'd like to also be a guest on our show, you can always email us at info@skepticpsychic. Next week, we are going to have another guest. We're having a psychic come on, and she's going to be doing predictions for 2023. So if you have anything that you want, any predictions you'd like to hear, send us a message and we'll make sure to ask. But
Where do
again,
we find ourselves?
yes, you can find us at skepticpsychic.com.
And you can go ahead and send us those questions at info@skepticpsychic.com.
Yes, or you can join us in our Facebook group, Skeptic Psychic, and hang out with some great people.
Yeah.
And anything I forgot?
No.
Thank you for joining.
Yes, thank you again for joining us this week.
And
And
thank
it's
you
been
for
such a
first time
pleasure.
meeting you, Shelley.
It was wonderful meeting you, Richard. Your
Yes.
name is Richard, if you didn't remember. Thank you. Thank you. It was interesting. It's been fun, though. It's been fun. All my nerves were for nothing.
Yes.
Exactly. That's the way it always happens. I still to this day get nervous before every show, but once you get in and get in the swing of things, it's
well, you guys have awesome backgrounds, and I'm like, I don't know how to do what they're doing. They've got a background, and I'm not tech savvy enough for that. But I'm like, this will work.
I love your background.
This picture I took at the Salt Lake City cemetery. It's like maybe 501 Foothill Drive in downtown Salt Lake.
Is that a Mormon cemetery?
It's mostly Mormon, but they also have other people, buried there as well.
Right. Is it a public cemetery or?
Yes, it is.
Is it?
I was able to take these pictures.
Well, you can get into. I mean, it's not like they're going to turn you away, but if you want to be buried there, that's a whole different thing.
It is a cemetery where you can actually,
The interesting thing about Mormon headstones, if you see books on the headstones, for Mormons, you'll see 2 books. And the one is the Book of Mormon, and then the other is the Bible. Whereas with Christian ones, you'll see one, the Bible. But that's one way you can kind of tell if you're looking at a Mormon headstone. It'll have the 2 books.
Right.
Yes.
I know too much of this. I need to get out more, I guess.
Right.
It's my poor husband. He has to put up with it.
Alrighty. Well, again, thank you for coming on here, Shelley. We appreciate it.
Thank
and
you.
like I said, if anybody would like to be part of our discussion, you can always reach us at info@skepticpsychic.com, and we can set up and be able to talk to you about everything.
Yes,
it'll work.
Yes.
Thank you, Raymond, for telling me I did my thing.
Yes.
And yes, Raymond in the chat. I'm glad you're feeling better too. He had the same thing, you guys. He's not as far along as you are in getting better, but he had the same thing, the chest and the coughing and all that. So
I lost my voice for 2 weeks.
Well, have a good night, everybody.
You too.
Thank you, you too. Good night.
Good night, honey.
And good night, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Unpleasant nightmares.
Sweet dreams.
Sweet
Good night.
dreams are made of these.
Good night.
Good night.